love me a good Metroidvania game, so when I saw Hollow Knight, it was inevitable that I would be giving it a look. Hollow Knight is, as one might assume, a Metroidvania game that recently came out on Steam. You play as a beetle knight in a world inhabited by giant bugs. The game plays like a melee-driven Metroid game, with large open-world maps teeming with enemies. The game plays very smoothly, with a somewhat slow but methodical combat system. It has a vibe of games like Hyper Light Drifter, of course not being as rough as Hyper Light Drifter is, and even the old-school Zelda games to an extent. Most of the enemies are run-of-the-mill baddies, but the dangerous enemies require patience and timing to dart in when they're vulnerable to quick hits. The game is not overly difficult, actually being quite similar to the old Game Boy Metroid games. Most enemies and even bosses can be dealt with on the first run if you have a keen eye and quick reflexes. What is particularly interesting about the Hollow Knight system is its magic system. It's not strictly presented to the player as a magic system, instead the player is using what are called soul powers. In the upper left-hand section of the screen is a circle that, as the player hits enemies, will fill up with white light. This is the magic bar itself. The first use of this magic currency is to heal the player. This is an interesting system that, in the beginning, seems a bit overpowered. Every time you fight enemies, you are given more of an ability to heal yourself from any damage that might be taken. However, rather quickly the player is given other powerful spells, such as shooting a ranged attack that does a significant amount of damage. From there, the player must balance whether or not they want to keep magic for healing or spend it on a powerful attack. I found this to be quite an interesting and engaging system. Now, the brunt of the gameplay focuses on exploration. The player is given very little indication of where they should go outside of being told to find a city that is somewhere deep underground. This actually works out quite nicely, as the environments are lush and not overly difficult to traverse, most of the time. The easier enemies that are dotted throughout the area make for a good respite from just meandering about. For those who aren't too keen to run all the way across the world numerous times, as I wouldn't expect one to necessarily be, there are fast travel spots that allow a player to move from one region to another in mere moments. Of course, those have to be unlocked before they can be used, but they are nice for quick movement. Most of the exploration begins at the starting Hubtown, wherein there are shops to buy upgrades and new abilities. The Hubtown presents a large amount of the narrative elements of the game, which is listening to characters talk to your character, who never actually talks himself. While the Hubtown is a center of player-NPC interactions, the player will have to save and find characters throughout the world in order to get them to come to the Hubtown, and simply also find people who don't join the Hubtown at all. This system is quite reminiscent of saving NPCs in the various Dark Souls games. The similarities with Dark Souls doesn't end there. Hollow Knight employs a death system that is very similar to Dark Souls'. When the player dies, they lose all of the money that they have collected, and a dark shadow enemy is created where they died. The player must then return to that spot and defeat the shadow enemy to regain their money. If they are to die on the way there, their money is lost. While this is very similar to the Dark Souls system, it's not quite as punishing, since deaths are far fewer and farther between in Hollow Knight, and the shadow enemy is not particularly dangerous to fight. However, it does add another level of complexity, which is rather nice. Now we have to talk about the elephant in the room, the aesthetics of the game. Really, it was the visuals that drew me to this game initially. They are gorgeously drawn with very fluid movements from all the characters. The world maintains a strong aesthetic that is just gorgeous. If the strong gameplay wasn't enough to sell you on this game, the visuals will certainly do so. Every character has so much visual intrigue. To put it simply, it is a brilliant looking game. If I had to point out a flaw with the game, it would probably be the game's narrative. It has a very similar flow to Dark Souls, wherein it's very heavily lore-based. I didn't find the lore exceptionally intriguing, and quite frankly, not very much information is given to the player. However, each of the individual characters does have enough personality to make up for the lack of strong narrative in the game. It's certainly not a deal breaker, but it is a point to be considered. To sum it up, this is a great game. It is on par with the old Metroid games, and even better than its successful contemporaries like Axiom Verge. That's not to say that Axiom Verge is bad, only that Hollow Knight is just that good. It is well worth the $15 price tag that it is asking. In fact, it's probably worth more than that. If you're interested at all, go pick it up. You will not regret it. Thanks for watching, and of course, as always, enjoy the rest of your day.